Our real world rule of money for today is, well, let me ask you a question. When you're about to retire, what is your top concern? What is your top concern? Is it the fees that you'll pay in your retirement account? Is it the overall performance of the retirement account? Is it that you're worried you might go into a long-term care facility? Is it that you're worried you might run out of income? What is your biggest worry when it comes to retirement planning? Where the real world rule of money comes from today is I recently met with somebody actually very close to me that I originally met with about 14 years ago. And I'll just be honest, to all those that are in business, sometimes your first try isn't the best try. Sometimes your first try isn't the one that succeeds. A quote that I love, if at first you don't succeed, you're totally normal. If at first you don't succeed, that's normal. That's just called life, and that's how we learn, and that's how we gain experience. So, retirement planning is not just financial consulting, looking at this fund or that fund and what the fees are and the overall performance and all of that. So I just recently, again, met with somebody, and they had been recommended a fund by somebody, that was a financial planner. And there's nothing wrong with financial planning or planners. There's nothing wrong with it. But what was really interesting is he had a proposal, and the proposal was a fund and what the expense ratio was and what his fee was and what the overall performance was, most recent quarter, year to date, 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, 10 years since inception. I mean, just the typical run-of-the-mill, all over the place, hundreds of thousands of them, just financial, projection, with nice little pictures or whatever. So then I started asking them about what their primary goal was, and it was to make sure that they could replace the income they had now. And so I said, okay, if that's your primary goal when you retire, how does this fund help you do that? And typical to the typical financial industry, well, there's this thing called the 4% rule that as long as you don't take more than 4%, you don't run out of money. Well, Harvard Business put out an interesting article about that, about the 4% rule. But if that's all your money and all you're doing is pulling out 4% per year, well, what happens when you want more? Right? And so there was just more. And then I asked him, okay, well, so you've got this fund. How do you feel about it? Risk tolerance, all that stuff. How is this taxed? How does this affect your taxes? No idea. I asked him what provisional income was. No idea. How does this fund affect your Social Security income? I don't know. Well, what about when you pass away? What are you hoping that happens when you pass away? Leave a bunch to the kids, a little bit to the kids, something to the kids, grandkids. And they're like, well, so they express their opinions there. And I said, okay, so how does this fund or what this guy recommended, how does that help you accomplish that? Well, we didn't really talk about that. Okay, well, what would happen if, in his mom, they just moved into a long-term care facility, a memory care facility, that I don't know how they found this one, but it's a memory care facility that's $4,000 a month. Maybe there's something subsidizing that, but $4,000 a month for a memory care is 6, 7, 8, 12, 15, depending on the state you live in and if they're a flight risk, right? So then I asked them, is that a concern of yours? You just moved your mother, who's in her 80s, into a long-term care facility. Is that something that you're worried about? And they said, yeah, that's something we think about, but because of our health, we're not really sure if we can even afford that type of planning. And I said, well, how does this fund, did you ask this financial guy, when you met with him, how this fund what would happen if that were to happen? If you were to move into long-term care? Is it just same old, same old? What goes down, comes back, and if it loses, it comes back, and fees and performance, and that's it? Like, that's all you talked about? And so when it really came down to it, this picture pops into my mind, this picture right here that we're looking at, is when it comes to retirement planning, it's not just about the financial planning. Because the first question I ask when I walk in are, well, okay, tell me about the Morningstar rating of what you're talking about. Tell me about the fees. And yes, those are good questions. But are those the only questions? Those aren't the only questions, because taxes are important. Income's going to be important. Yeah, the fees and the performance are important, but the legacy planning and the care planning. And so this picture pops in my mind, and I said, hey, real world rule of money tomorrow, this is going to be it. So the real world rule of money is the 5 sides of retirement planning. The 5 sides of retirement planning are, number 1, financial planning, fees, performance, funds, allocations, diversification, all those things. But then also income planning, making sure that we're not going to run out, that we and our money last the same amount of time, that we don't outlive the money, that hopefully the money outlives us, unless you're on one end of the spectrum that says, I want my last check to bounce, like on Ocean's 11, the old guy, or the way at the other end that people say, I want to leave as much as possible to my children when I die. And that's an option too. And then there's everything in between. So there's income planning. Then there's tax planning. How does the money I have saved, IRAs, 401ks, mutual funds, managed accounts, whatever I've got, pensions, how are my taxes affected? Provisional income, taxable income, employment income, pensions, minus my deductions or standard deductions, all of those things, the tax planning of it that may require getting a CPA in the room. Okay, then you have your care planning. What happens if I end up in a long-term care facility? Well, what happens if I don't need a long-term care facility, but I need in-home care? What happens if I'm alive and my wife goes into a long-term care facility? What happens if we're both alive and I go into long-term? What happens if neither one of us do, but I die, right? So that's legacy planning. What happens when we both die? And what's that legacy that we're going to leave? And all 5 of these sides, there are none of them that can be ignored when it comes to retirement planning. And I'm not saying that everybody does this, but it seems since 2005, since I've been doing this, that a lot of the people that I meet with are either meeting with, CPA, that will tell them the tax side, or they're meeting with an insurance guy that's telling them the legacy planning, or maybe some income planning with annuities. They've met with, a long-term care planning person, or they've met with a financial advisor. And very few, and there are some good eggs and some bad eggs, but very few are looking at all 5 of these things. And so whether you're in the industry and teaching this, all 5 need to be taught, or you're exploring your own options and what you need to do with your own plan, making sure that all 5 areas are looked at. And that's our real world rule of money today, the 5 sides of retirement planning.